So I'm going to go ahead and start to introduce our first session for the day, which will be the panelists from the caregiver parent point of view. And we're so grateful to have our moderator today, Dr. Alycia Halladay, who is the Chief Science Officer at Autism Science Foundation, where she oversees scientific activities, grants, and initiatives for the foundation. Prior to joining the foundation, she did serve as the Senior Director in Clinical Environmental Sciences at Autism Speaks, so we also appreciated that. But I also think Alycia brings a unique perspective, an important perspective, because she is also a parent of a child that's on the spectrum as well. So I think she's a great moderator. I think she brings a new perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Alycia.
Thank you, Dean, and I'm very honored to be a part of this meeting today. As Dean mentioned, my name is Alycia Halladay. I am the Chief Science Officer at the Autism Science Foundation. I have 11-year-old twin girls, one of which is on the spectrum. But today I am here to listen and to maybe gather your insights from the panel that Dean put together. So thank you all for joining us. This has been an interesting day. I hope you guys can all stay for the rest of the day. I know schedules may not permit, but I'm going to try and stay on for as long as I possibly can and attend as many sessions. So what I'd like to do first is allow our panelists to introduce themselves, talk about a little bit about their own situation, themselves, their child, their family. Nothing is off the table as long as people are comfortable. And we're going to do this alphabetically only because the way that I see people on the screen is not the same way other people see everybody on the screen. So we're going to start alphabetically. And maybe when we do the questions, all people can jump in and volunteer to go first. Otherwise, I'll be maybe going in reverse alphabetical order just to shake things up a bit. So first, Jennifer Brown, would you just introduce yourself and talk about your family and anything you want?
I'm Jennifer Brown, and I am from Cincinnati, Ohio. And our family consists of me, my husband, and our 47-year-old son who has severe autism and an intellectual disability. I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I worked at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, where I was part of the autism program and worked on was part of the diagnostic team at Cincinnati Children's. Currently, I am involved. It's interesting. Aging, I guess, is a topic everywhere because we have several initiatives in our community on aging and intellectual disability. So I've been involved in doing that, and I also co-facilitate a severe autism group for caregivers. So that's and just to say a little bit more, I guess, about my son. Well, first of all, I guess I want to say I really enjoyed yesterday, and there was kind of a word of the day, and that was Byzantine. And to me, the takeaway word for me today is going to be heterogeneity, because the spectrum is just so broad. And my son, Richard, is an example of a difference from yesterday. He was diagnosed when he was 3. He has very limited communication. During all the way up through his 30s, he was aggressive, self-injurious. Thankfully, he has mellowed in his 40s, and we don't have aggression anymore. But he still requires round-the-clock, 24-hour day care, someone with him at all times. And he has no self-preservation skills. He's not able to protect himself in any way. He has so-so self-care skills. But he also is a pretty good artist, and he has a beautiful singing voice and loves karaoke. His favorite thing in life is to go out to restaurants. He's a perfect shot when he plays basketball, and he goes to church and he walks at the track near his house, and so he has kind of a fairly good life, but that's kind of Richard. So I'll turn it over to the next person.
Jennifer, can I just ask, where does Richard live now?
Okay. Richard lives, well, this is interesting. If you were asking me this 2 years ago, pre-COVID, I would tell you that Richard has his own house. He lives there. We spent time with him on the weekends, but he was pretty much functioning in his own house. COVID hit, and Richard ended up back at home at our house. And, spent several, we could not get staff. There was no, his day program was shut down. His direct support staff, there was no direct support staff. So he was home with us. We've now been able to put together some care. So now, and this is probably another amazing thing about Richard, he lives 4 days a week at his house and 3 days a week at our house. And he goes back and forth between the two houses. And he's just fine. It doesn't seem to bother him at all. I would probably be, climbing the walls by now. But he's just like, okay, which house do I sleep at tonight? And so we've put together some care, but we're still nowhere near where we were before COVID.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure that's the situation for a lot of panelists today. I'm going to turn it over to Gary Turner Bright. Gary, would you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your family? And I think Jennifer did a great job, so do what she did.
Hi, I'm Jerry Turner Bright. My son is Robert. He's 24 years old. Robert was diagnosed right after 9/11. He literally the day after he had an appointment at the Lamb Institute. We live in Brooklyn, New York. And Robert was diagnosed with regressive autism. That was the old diagnosis. And then they just said PDD-NOS. And that was sort of the catch-all. That was the basket, because they really didn't. 24 years ago, it was the dark ages. It was still the dark ages. It's hard to believe. But we did not take the diagnosis as the prognosis. I come from a long family of faith, and I'm a minister myself. And his father and I made the decision, along with our immediate family, his grandparents, that we were raising him in joy, period. Because there was no other way that we could go, because it was they basically gave us our child. And I remember a doctor saying it was far better if your child was diagnosed with cancer, because at least there's a protocol. There was no protocol. It was whatever you thought was best for your child, even if it was invasive, because back then there were a lot of invasive therapies that people were looking to cure their child. And we never used that language. But Robert has, he refused to be kept in anyone's box. And though they said at 3, and I know this is horrific in 2022 to hear this, but we were told basically put him in an institution, go home and have another baby and do it again. And I remember the burning of those words. It was sort of like they were branded in my brain, that someone would infer that we could take a child and put him away and go home and just do it again. So Robert is an only child. One of the byproducts, I think, that a lot of families that I know personally in raising Robert is that there are sometimes casualties. Our marriage was one of the casualties, not because we did not love each other, is because we couldn't see then how to maintain our marriage and raise him, because he had a lot of medical issues. Robert had severe GERD. He had to have surgery at 6 months. Then he had dumping syndrome, and then he was presenting with seizures that they could never trace. And we later found out, we finally found a pediatrician that was looking for it, not just poo-pooing the new mom and dad who, it's in your head, you're looking for something, and we weren't looking for something. We were looking for an answer. So one of the things that in raising Robert is that we have learned how to not to build a house in happy or sorrow. We pitch tents because there are seasons, because Robert had a lot of medical issues. Don't get stuck there. He then had behavioral issues. Don't get stuck there. But if you pitch a tent, that means that you're going to be leaving at some point. And we don't get stuck anymore. So Robert at 24 years old is, and this is for a lot of children, he goes to, we live in Brooklyn, New York, and Robert has self-direction, which we have here in New York. In New York State, which basically Robert has a budget, and together we determine how Robert's budget is going to be spent on the things that interest Robert. Robert is a hardcore musician. He has a voice that will blow you out of the water. His new thing now is that he vacillates between singing James Taylor and now he's really into Bob Marley. So he's singing songs in between, and he plays piano and he's a percussionist, but he's also an avid sportsman, and he's writing. But his expressive language is still evolving. We are amazed at the child that he's become. He loves Seinfeld and he laughs appropriately. So there are things that we now know about Robert that I would like to say this about Robert is that he's got a sense of humor that is, he's a New York kid. He's a Brooklyn kid. He finds things funny that, are, kind of slightly sarcastic. His favorite is if somebody does something and he thinks it's ridiculous, he says, and they say, I'm autistic. And I realize now that is Robert's way of laughing at anyone who may laugh at him, because people still do. And there's a lot of ignorance, but we have raised a child that is joyous, who does not label himself. Because if you ask him, there's two things that we realize. If you ask him, are you on the spectrum? He just sort of looks at you like, or when somebody says, do you know you're autistic? Or do you know ASD? Robert doesn't know that, but Robert also doesn't identify people by race. So I think that this is really interesting. It is not that Robert doesn't see, Robert doesn't care. And that's all that we wanted, so that Robert could be a joyous human and have the full scope of emotions and not get stuck in a label. And that, I think that we've, up until now, we've been pretty successful. And you would love him. He's just a phenomenal kid. And I still call him kid, even though he's a young adult. He's my kid. So I'm allowed. I'm his mother. And that's Robbie. And thank you for listening.
And I can't wait to meet Robert. He sounds amazing. And I think it's totally okay for all of us, no matter how old our child is, to keep calling them our child and our kid.
I know.
Keep doing that. Don't stop. And I also think it's interesting that 2 for 2, we have musicians and people that love music so far. So that's interesting. I can't wait to hear it from the other panelists. So the next person I have alphabetically is Maddie Dever, and I hope that I'm pronouncing your last name correctly.
You wouldn't be the first to mispronounce it, but my name is Maddie Dever.
Okay, sorry. My apologies.
No problem. So my name is Maddie Dever, and I am autistic. I'm non-binary, and I use they, them pronouns. I'm a parent of 5 kids, 4 of whom are also autistic. I am diabetic. I'm a wheelchair user due to spinal cord injury. I'm white with long brown hair. I wear glasses. I'm wearing a violet golf shirt, and I'm sitting in a wide brown chair. I'm a hockey fan. I am Canadian. And all of these describe parts of my identity and make up who I am. I am also the vice co-chair of Autism Alliance Canada, formerly known as CASDA, and I live in rural Eastern Ontario near Ottawa in Canada. Now, my kids are 23, 22, 16, 14, and 13, and they are all over the spectrum. And we are also a rainbow family. We're a family that loves structure and loves randomness. We are also prone to breaking out into song and dance at any moment. Music is a passion and a thread that runs through all of us. And I'm seeing this as a very common thing today. Music has unlocked words and unlocked emotions. And I'll talk about my son. The day that my son was diagnosed at 20 years ago, it was the best day of my life because I had a name and a label to describe my son. And I knew that would help me research and understand him more and how to help him. It was the worst day for my mom, who was in that generation that autism was the worst thing and meant institutionalization. But I learned through my son to watch him and follow his interests and his lead. And I learned to I learned to follow his lead to interact with him instead of the common theory, which was to make him come and interact with me. I learned to jump into his world. And the journey for every other kid was different. The two younger girls were diagnosed later at 5 and 6. And my 22-year-old just discovered that she was autistic 2 years ago. And I've been helping her alongside that journey. Autism in girls is so different, and so much more needs to be done to improve diagnosing them, to tailor programs and services to girls, and to see the signs and characteristics differently. So many girls are lost in that gap. And as they age, the gap between them and their peers becomes more difficult. And especially in the tween years, the struggles and mental health issues are so much more prominent than they are with boys. And there's so much more that we need to do to help them.
Sorry, everyone. I'm working in New York City today and there's a lot of noise. So I'm trying to keep myself on mute so I'm able to let other people speak. So now we have 3 for 3, musicians, artists. So, okay, not to ruin our streak, but the next person I have is Kelsey. So don't feel pressured if your child is not musically inclined.
Thanks, Alycia. And I'm sorry, but I am going to have to break this thread. I am living in Toronto. I grew up in Western Canada, but have been living in Toronto for 25 years. And so I live with my husband, my stepson, who was diagnosed with Asperger's at the age of 13, which of course would now be part of the autism spectrum, lives about half a block away. And so he is married and has a son who also is on the autism spectrum. I also have a daughter who has twin sons, fraternal twins, who are both on the autism spectrum. And then we have 2 other children as well. And to the best of our knowledge, nobody else has autism. There's been no additional diagnosis, although attention deficit hyperactive disorder has definitely been diagnosed in 2 of my grandchildren. So we have definitely a neurodiverse family. There are musicians on my side of the family, but not in our immediate family. So I'm very sorry. I took up guitar a few years ago, but I wouldn't play for anybody. So the other thing that I have as my background. So I had a long banking career, but I am now the relationship manager for a not-for-profit organization called Lime Connect. And we are focused on rebranding disability through achievement. So we work with people of a wide range of disabilities. We bring them into our network. We help to prepare them for career opportunities, and then we connect them with corporate partners who are helping to fund our operation. I was on the board of what was then the Asperger's Society of Ontario, now called the ASO, for many years. So I've had exposure as a caregiver, so stepmother, grandmother, but also as a professional to disability in general, but autism in particular. And so a little bit more about Dan, who I will talk about primarily. So Dan was diagnosed at 13, is 47. So somebody else has a 47-year-old son. I forget who that was. Okay. And so he's married, has a son. He is employed. His passion has always been cars. So He can tell you more about cars than anybody else in our family, and I think probably a lot of other people. That's not what he is employed doing, though. And we always said that if Dan had a head for numbers, he could be a great salesperson, but unfortunately, finance and math and finance are not a strength whatsoever. So that's about me, and that's about our family.
Do you live close to your stepson?
Yeah, he's like half a block
okay.
away.
Okay.
And that was by design. So what he and his wife and son lived with us for their early marriage and until my grandson was born. And then we found a place that they could live in that was still close enough that we could provide support as required. So he's very close by.
That's nice. Last but definitely not least is Jeff Rickel.
Oh gosh, let me say that it is a deep, deep honor and privilege and joy to be in the presence of such greatness. You know, what you've been able to accomplish academically, what you've been able to do just in life and living life, and what you've been able to do in raising such exceptional children, it's just truly, truly an honor here. And I don't know, especially for the autistic parents, just to realize that you were created so special for just such a special children. And my hat is off for you, and my admiration for all of you guys is so incredible. I am Jeff Rickel. I only found out recently, but I am on the spectrum as well. And I have a very beautiful Chinese wife. God went all the way as far as he could go to bring me the wife I have. And an exceptional, I guess, miracle child called Jonathan. And he has Down syndrome and autism. And we found out about the Down syndrome before he was born. We had the amnio test, and we're both very religious. So, the idea of abortion wasn't really on the table. And then, when the genetic counselor talked to us about it, then she was just relieved when she said, no, we're going to keep him. And then she said, no, these are called angel children. And we're so afraid that he would grow up and be angry at us for bringing him into the world and stuff. And she said, no, these children themselves are glad to be alive and just enjoy life to the full. And it kind of complicated the diagnosis of autism, because there was something not quite the same that people kept seeing in him that didn't quite match Down syndrome. And then, so we had to go to a very, very special, her name was BJ Freeman. I think that she was a part of original ABA, but she could actually fine tune it and differentiate between what was from Down syndrome and what was from autism. And then she gave us kind of the rest of the diagnosis, and that helped. And the other thing about his birth was, we found out we were pregnant. We had a miscarriage before, but then there was kind of like a death to a dream, because you know what you kind of want your children to be like. And we didn't get that. And there's kind of a mourning in a way, just what you thought would happen. But we knew people with Down syndrome. A friend had it, and he was just doing wonderfully things. Child was a hero. And also we went to a minister who had Down syndrome in a service, and he was a musician. He played that, and then he gave a sermon and stuff. And we just looked at Jonathan, and we kind of knew that what he wouldn't be, we didn't know what he would be. It was kind of like having a present under a tree that you had to open up and give to find out what it was. I think Forrest Gump said they felt the same thing about chocolates. And then, so we did name him Jonathan, which means gift from God. And it's weird that you don't get what you expect, but you get something better. And sometimes God knows what we need a lot better than we do. And he gave us the perfect child, and the one that we needed most to have. And just someone who could love unconditionally, accept you, be enthusiastic about you. And you could be having a terrible day, and you walk home, he's going, Daddy, 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 and everything else fades away. And I wouldn't have done this. And a mistake I made, because I had a Down syndrome son. And sometimes you get so focused on the disability that you forget that you actually have a son and a child. The most important thing you can do is just to be a good parent. And then I realized, God hadn't taken anything away from me. He gave me the same thing. He gave me a son. And the most important thing I could do for him was to be a good father And it took me so long just to learn that, and that was his biggest need. I had grown up with a lot of self-hatred because of the autism. I always hated myself. And there's a lot of just internalized anger, and sometimes even anger at God, for creating me the way I was. And I felt so much of the time like the Incredible Hulk, and there's this monster inside me that I had to keep inside me, and I couldn't let it out. And I was diagnosed later on with autism. At least I understood what it was like to have. It's like you have a car. It's been smoking. You don't know what's wrong with it. You take it to a mechanic and say, yes, this. And then I could kind of learn a little bit more about autism and who I was. I'd also been through a lot of conferences for Jonathan. And a lot of what they said sounds so familiar. And so when I finally got the diagnosis a few years ago, a lot of things kind of clicked and fell into place. There was self-hatred. I didn't like myself. I even ran away from God when I was a child. And the stuff inside me got so bad that I just wanted someone else to be in control of my life. I wanted anything that could make my life better, that could bring peace and joy. And I did find all that in God. I found a reason to like myself and accept who I was, and even to take life's challenges and know you're going to get through it. And also just to know that there could be something extra, someone extra to help you to meet the challenges. You could look beyond what you could do in yourself and trust in it, and always have hope in any and every situation. So my dream for Jonathan was that he could like himself and he could live a full life and a rich life. And we're going back on the, the pattern with musicians, because, I play music myself, got it from my grandmother, but Jonathan also seemed to have picked it up. And he doesn't have the talent that a lot of you guys do, but he has a lot of heart and just a love for that and just a desire to entertain people. And this comes through. And so a lot of people have seen and heard him all over the world and stuff. And, it's not someone you can put on a label, but people enjoy listening to him and just watching him perform. And he even started going to nursing homes and just being able to give uplifting sermons to them, and also to play music for them. And he just loves to entertain people. A few years ago, he started to bend over, and we didn't know what happened when COVID hit. And then we found out that he had a back injury, and we have no idea where, when, or how it occurred. And, and just trying to cope with that these last couple of years, and just wondering, would he ever be able to do the things he likes to do? He loved to go to amusement parks. He loved to travel. He loved sports a lot and just being active. He loved to be with people. And a lot of that seemed to have gone away, and we're still trying to deal with the injury. He's still mobile. And right now we're trying to gradually give him the life back, because a lot of people kept telling us, just let him live the life that he enjoys and let him live a full life in spite of what weaknesses are there. And so we're trying to find that and cope with it. We're also just trying to figure out what's going to happen long term after Esther and I are gone.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll say about Jonathan is that he's one of my great teachers. We had a question about, what do you want to impart to your child? But he's imparted so much to me, because he has a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. And he turned on those and he said, I'm going to conquer each of these. I'm going to master each of these. And then also his last couple of years, he's been in a lot of pain. He still looks at people. He wants to entertain people. He wants to make them laugh and make them happy. He cares a lot about them. He wants to just go and love him. Even, when he is in pain, it's like there's something in him that thinks about other people, beyond himself, and wants to serve people and, entertain, make them happy and make them laugh. And so he's kind of one of my heroes and someone that I'm learning from an awful lot. And we've been in a church community all of his life. And we wanted to dedicate him just that he would be in an environment where there are other people around that could love and support him. And so he's always had a lot of friends and people who care about him and surrounded him and been a part of his life. And so we're also grateful, I guess, to God and for the church. And a verse that God gave me was that we're all God's masterpiece, his workmanship, a very, very special creation. And we will all have wonderful things that we can do with God's help. And this was the first time I could actually see anything good about myself. But I gave that to Jonathan as well. It's also true from him. And then another verse that he has is, I can do all things through God who strengthens me, which means that, any life, any challenge that we have, that you'll get through it, that God will give you the strength to get through it. And that's been so true in John's life. And we've seen it many, many times. And just whatever hits us, COVID, the injury, or anything else, you just know that somehow you're going to get through. And that's been absolutely incredible.
Thank you, Jeff. I hate to cut you
that's
off, but
pretty much most of it.
I'm hearing I'm hearing a lot of different threads, and this is a meeting about aging. So I want to get to some questions specifically about aging. And I want to start with Jennifer. So some of our kids are older than others, so we have different perspective in terms of how things have changed as they've gotten older. So I'll start with Jennifer. So what are some new concerns? I mean, well, first of all, Jeff mentioned something I think everyone resonates with everyone, that there's an overwhelming fear of what's going to happen when, that we pass, right? So who's going to take care of, who's going to be the person that takes care of them as well as we have been taking care of them for all these years. So I think that that's always a concern. So how have things changed, Jennifer, for you and your son as your son became older, as you've gotten older? These can include financial concerns, support needs, health concerns. If you could just speak for a couple minutes. I know we're not going to get through all the questions that I had, but I'd like to get through at least a couple of them. So just in a couple minutes.
Well, as the big worry, as you say, is what's going to happen. And as I mentioned, we really don't have any extended family. And so we're in, when we go, my husband and I go to the doctor, it's like, you got to keep us alive because we got to be there for Richard. So that's the big worry. Richard still, obviously, what he's going to do, after he got out of the educational system, what he was going to do in the daytime. And unfortunately, for some of the folks with the more severe challenges, he had a nice program where he did do things. He had some jobs that he did. He assembled shoe orthotic boxes, and he was really good at it, and he got some money for it, but it was less than minimum wage. It didn't meet the criteria for CMS, and so that all went away. And he really, so now is just in a day activity program. So that has been one of the changes as he's aged, is that we kind of realized, since he doesn't care about money, and community employment just didn't seem to work out for him, community employment options. So we've had to I have him in a day program that's not where the kind of program that I would have put him in. I mean, he's safe. He gets to do whatever he wants to do, but it's just not probably the perfect program. And I guess the other fear is kind of medical. He's he can't tell us what's wrong. He can't tell us if he's sick. And so I know as he's aging, how do you deal with someone that we all age and things go wrong with us as we age, and how do you deal with that? And he's terrified of, one of the huge mistakes we made back when he was little is that there was no child life that hospitals have now, where they, are very careful about how they, they don't traumatize the patients, which is what they basically did to my son when, if we need to do a test on him, we'll just hold him down. And so he was really pretty much traumatized by anything medical. So getting the COVID shots in him, we had to, pre-medicate him. It was done in the car. We had, an army of people ready to do it. And so how do you do, how do you do medical care? How do you do medical tests on somebody that is so frightened? So that's one of our concerns now as he's aging.
Jerry, I'm not going to skip you, but I'm going to go to Karen because she also has a little bit of an older son. We're not going to say older. And then I'm going to go back to you.
Yes, because that would make me even older. So things that have changed, I guess, well, in some ways, things have gotten easier. Dan, I think somebody else mentioned about their son being quite aggressive in their 30s. And I don't know if he certainly wasn't always aggressive, but if he was, if people were trying to change his perspective on things and he really was stuck on a specific position, he would often have a meltdown. And so that's certainly gotten a lot easier. He's much easier to reason with. And some of that's medication. And I think a lot of it is actually maturity. But some of the things that have also happened is because Dan is not great at self-care. So, he's had lots of dental work, and, left to his own devices, he probably wouldn't still have his own teeth. He doesn't get a good amount of exercise. He doesn't have a great diet. He's married, and I think his wife tries, but that again, she can only influence him to so much, to a certain degree, and the same for us. So I think some of our concerns are that as he gets older and as we get older, are we going to continue to have the stamina, one, to provide that ongoing support, but also, will we be able to continue to influence him? And then once we're not around, who will have that role? Who will be able to take that on? And the other thing is that Dan lives in a false economy. So he is, so he receives a lot of financial support from us. And so he has a budget, but he really doesn't stick to that budget. So it's trying to work with him on that. And I would say that there's definitely been progress made, but, he has a huge appetite to spend money, but he doesn't always have that money. So it's, and in trying to give him some independence, it's always been a fine line between giving him enough room to make his own decisions and giving him enough space to fall over the cliff. So it's a juggling act, and I'm sure other people can relate to that. So again, going forward as we age, and as we if we're no longer here, who will provide that kind of support and guidance? So those are definitely some of the concerns and some of the things that have changed and will continue to change. Certainly the maturing aspect, I think, is something that we've felt really good, and it's been really great to witness, because you just don't know. We all develop at a different rate, and I think in particular, people who are autistic tend, at least in my experience, tend to mature later. And so it's been really interesting, and I think quite rewarding to watch some of that.
Thank you. Jerry?
Yeah, I just, Jennifer and Karen, thank you so much for just what you just both said, because when we started the journey, the parenting journey, we realized very early on, Robert was angelic looking. I mean, he was really a beautiful child, and he's a very handsome young man. And we realized that people wanted to do things for Robert based on, he's adorable. There's and this is the fear, is that I realize now, is that I didn't understand it until Robert started growing. And I realized that so much emphasis then was on autistic children. What happens? What happens to them as they grow up? Are they still, what happens to people's emotions when you're dealing with an adult who can sometimes be unreasonable to us because they may not be compliant to something basic, something basic, like we have to go to the doctor. No, I don't want to go, and he throws a tantrum. But the journey, and I really appreciate what you both have said, is that, Robert is growing into Robert. And I realize that now, that this is Robbie, this is his personality. And Robert truly has, and then there's another word, mastery, the mastery of himself. and allowing Robert to have the time to do that. I know that it's like, I feel the press of time because as I'm growing older, I realize I'm an older parent. But his dad is diagnosed with Asperger's. So, and he's a musician, P.S., by the way, and he plays with people with name value. And I realize now that he's, he created his life for himself his way. Even though I don't always agree with it, he's very comfortable with, he's got a lot of idiosyncrasies and he's got to have things just a certain way. And he does them. And so does Robert. And now I realize that the things that Robert does is to protect Robert from having to do things that he might find offensive, but he will find his own way to do them. So it's not so Robert now, I own a 2-family home. So Robert rents the downstairs apartment. That was the answer to what will happen to Robert? Where will Robert live? We knew we didn't want to do day habs or com habs because Robert has always shown us, I'm in here, find me. And that's how we basically, like even now as an adult, the things that Robert is interested in, Robert asked one morning how to use the coffee machine. So every morning from the day that I showed him, every morning, 5:30, Robert shows up with my coffee at my door every morning. And then I realized that so you're interested in that. So you're interested in cooking? Yes. So I hired a chef. Robert now knows how to cook for himself. Robert knows how to wash his clothes. He cleans the house better than somebody I could probably pay because that's what interests him. So Robert was saying, without saying it, I want my independence. Give it to me. I can do it. And I realized that that's his communication is in the ask, show me. So now it's, I want to go to college. So guess what? Robert's going to take the GED because he went to a private school for children with ASD. So he doesn't have a Regents diploma. And now Robert is preparing to do just that. But my story, and I realize this, is not everyone else's story. And I can now no longer judge my story based on everyone else's. And that's the beauty of aging, is that we're wiser parents than we were when we started out.
That's very well said. And I also like your comment where maybe you can repeat it and put it in the chat. You don't pitch a tent where you're going to stay, which basically means you have to.
Oh yeah, I totally understand, Jeff, because Robert was raised, we're people of faith, and I'm a believer, and I always, when you're in the wilderness, and that's how we looked at it. We were in the wilderness in 1997 when he was born. And I realized I kept building houses where I should have pitched a tent. We're not going to stay here. And we get stuck, and we do this, just as human beings. We believe somewhere, and this is what, if we're telling ourselves that this is never going to end, well, the brain gets fixated on that and it won't end, even though it's changed. And Robert has changed. And, we took floor time and we made it vertical, because Robert shows us every day what he's interested in, and we just follow him. He was over the pandemic, Robert had massive canvases that he would paint, but he's not doing it anymore. It was a phase, just like us. We have phases. So the pitching the tent it's just pitch a tent. It's going to be temporary because we're going to be on to something else. You don't have to build a house. Don't get bricks and mortar. Don't get stuck. That's our saying, so that we don't get stuck in any phase of his life or ours.
Thank you for that. Maddie?
Sure. Thank you. So I am turning 47. Exactly. My mom passed away 3 years ago, but I was her kid up to that point, and I'm still her kid. I also realized in my own journey, the struggles that I faced as a child and teen and young adult are so different than the way I am in my 40s. I mean, being diagnosed in my 30s was a real pivot point into understanding myself and understanding my kids at the same time. I was very impulsive and prone to having incredible successes and incredible failures. In my late 30s, but especially these last 5 years, I've seen a mellowing, that's similar to some of you've seen in your kids. I've learned to stop and listen, and that one thing has changed my life. I was that wilder child, and I see that in my younger kids as they have grown and progressed in small and large ways. So I've been on this journey with autism for 23 years. 47 years if you count my life, but as a parent for 23 years. And the thing that I've learned the most and that I share with parents and professionals, and I think you guys have shared this bit too, and I share this every chance I get to speak, is that the child you see at 2 with the strengths and challenges that you see now will be different at 5, 10, 12, 15, 20, 25, and 40. The challenges ebb and flow. There will be new strengths uncovered and others nurtured, and there is progress. It just doesn't happen as a straight line as most neurotypical children do. I look at it somewhat as a bit of a ball of yarn. There is another end to the thread, and we do go through. Now, my son, who's the oldest, 23, all the rest are daughters and non-binary children. My son was mostly non-speaking until the age of 5. And then I spent a few months with him, half days while he was in kindergarten, teaching him phonics through music. And all of a sudden, he found his voice and his vocabulary exploded. And so many of his behaviors before that, I attribute to his inability to communicate. And he has shown me so many other things on my journey as his parent. And it's the same with my other kids. They're all so different, yet so similar. But the thing I needed to learn was patience. And I wish I had the chance to talk with parents of older autistic kids when I first started, who could tell me that the journey has progress. Because between 2 years and 5 years old, they were really, really tough years. And I went to a parent support group a few times after the diagnosis, and it was just awful. Parents just sharing horror stories at home, at school, with family. I never went back. So the real fear and concern that I have is as they approach adulthood. In the province where I live, Ontario, all financial support, all programs, all funding ends at 18. We magically are cured of autism, and there is no autism in adults. So you start fresh with the few adult programs that exist. And there are a few options for disability financial support after 18, but the application process is monstrous, and the amount provided is significantly below poverty. There is no independence when you're on it. It hasn't kept up with inflation, and it requires that you live with someone else just to survive. So for parents, this means knowing, regardless of how challenged your child may or may not be, they will probably need to live with you a while longer. Now, with all of my kids, I see my role as a parent of a teen at the edge of adulthood is to help them learn how to adult, how to take responsibility and ownership over their own lives. One of the things I've realized is with our kids, there is a real push to either educate them or help them with their behaviors or help them with whatever things are getting in their way, but they're not taught life skills, and the life skills just don't naturally come to us. So my hope is, I teach them how to take responsibility and ownership over their lives in whatever way they can, in whatever fashion is possible for them. And my hope is that I will prepare them for as much independence as possible. I encourage them to explore working, explore post-secondary education, to explore their passions, to explore volunteering, to use their interests to help them in helping them improve their own quality of life. I also allow them the space to make the mistakes and to be beside them as they learn how to fix their mistakes or move on from them. Finding supports for adult autistics is extremely difficult and extremely expensive. I know this is an autistic adult myself. What we need is different for adults than what may have helped us as children. We need educational supports, vocational support to both get and keep jobs, helping to find and keep housing, help participating in community events. This is why I advocate so much, because as much progress has been made for autistic children, we adults have not yet been understood or helped. And I, as an autistic adult who's dealing with my own health issues, I worry about the challenges that my kids have in trying to explain and understand what's going on. When they go to medical appointments, I sometimes have to, a doctor asks a question and I have to sort of rephrase it in a way that I know that my kids are going to answer. Nobody does that for me when I'm in the doctor's. I'm really good at advocating for my kids or anybody else in the world. But when I'm in an appointment with a doctor and they're asking me questions, I can't rephrase them for myself, and I find it really difficult to answer. So I do worry as I become older and less involved in supporting them. How are they going to get helped? Because there's a real gap, and we need all of the people that are in their lives, the medical professionals, to learn more about the patience you need to work with autistic of all ages.
Thank you. And that actually ties into my next question, but I'm going to let Jeff answer this one, is what sorts of research priorities? I know I'm jumping around, but we've got limited time. But Jeff, can you go ahead and talk about how things have changed as you've gotten older and your son has gotten older?
I'm finding that aging is affecting me in ways I hadn't anticipated. And this last few years, the autism seems to have had more and more control. I'm also having more and more trouble remembering things. There's been more impulsivity going on and less ability to focus and to concentrate. And these became scary for me. If this trend continues, what kind of a father am I going to be? How am I going to be able to take care of Jonathan? Autism Speaks has taught me that there are positive parts of autism. You can actually find parts that can help you. They can organize things, get more structure and stuff. And so I've been trying to dig into the positive side of autism to try to balance and steady state myself. And I feel like, there's hope. I can just adjust normally. It's like when you change gears, you can't go through snow and mud anymore, but you can maybe go a little bit smoother or faster and stuff. You just got to drive more carefully. So I'm anticipating that aging is not going to be the panic that I thought it would be. I worry a lot about my son, and not only that, but just what's going to happen after Esther and I get taken care of, and setting up a living trust for him, finding people that can take care of him. And they're actually got more help from the church than my own family, and we're looking to them more for this. And I talked to people years ago before he got this injury, and all of a sudden it's going to become more complicated, and I thought we'd be teaching him to become more independent than he is. So we worry a lot about that, and just having the life that he enjoys. And most people after the back injury said, let him live the life that he wants to live. And so we're hopefully, everything kind of stopped when he had his back injury, and we're afraid to say or think or do anything. And so we're hoping to get him back kind of more into that life. And I kind of love what Jerry said just about, you don't stay in this place, and we're not in the panic stage. I'm afraid to move or do anything for fear it's going to make him get worse or something. We're just starting to try to give him back as much of his life he can have. And then I want to make sure that after we're gone, it's not going to be just taking care of him, but let him have the life that he does live. And California has a self-determination plan, which means that there will be money available to help him to live the life that he has. And the services haven't been on curing him, but let him have that kind of life. And so I think that's probably going to be with him now. And so we just kind of need to complete the process right now of what's going to happen after we're gone, where he's going to live, what's going to happen. And he's not ever going to be independent, but there will be people I think in his life that can help him. And I trust in God for everything else. I just trust, this is going to be there too.
So we have only 8 minutes left. So I want to ask you and I'll start with Maddie because they've already identified some things. If you had to pick 2 things, let's start with 2, that you would want to focus research on. So things that need to be studied more to improve the lives of people as they get older. What would be those 2 things? And I know there's probably a list of 20, but
yeah, I'll give you 2 paragraphs. So I'll keep it concise. I think the missing gaps in research that are most needed is how to transition autistics from adolescence into adulthood, how to prepare us for adult lives, how to insert and measure quality of life as a required objective in programs. therapy supports for autistics. Like research on aging as we move towards our senior years, that's the other gap. We call them the two cliffs. How to keep agency in choices about our lives and housing situations as we age. And we probably need to do a thorough assessment of the needs of autistic adults, include us in the design and implementation of research that is about us and for us, and do a census to see how many of us are out there. Like we need to redesign assessments for diagnosis that is designed for adults and can look at autism as a fact and not necessarily as a deficit. I know it's more than two things, sorry.
No, don't apologize for that. Jennifer, if you had to pick two things, and I know there's a list, but if you had to pick two things that you want more kind of scientific targeting of, what would they be?
Well, I'd like to know what the early warning signs of aging look like in somebody with severe autism. So, like things like dysphagia or dementia, mobility issues, just, what are those early warning signs, early indicators? And then I'd also, like to, could we use technology in a way that can help us identify issues? I just heard something on NPR this morning about going to Mars and how they could do an MRI in your pocket or something. So I'm thinking, some kind of technology that could identify problems that are less invasive than what we have now. And this will be my third thing real fast. And just ways to deliver treatment, like just a shot. Can we do something other than give somebody a shot? Are there things that we can do to deliver treatments that are easier? And so those would be my areas.
Thank you. I'm learning more and more about how these different technologies are doing good. They were probably built for fun, but they're actually being used to do some good. So I'm glad that there's a session today on different technologies. I'm excited to hear about it. Jerry, what do you think?
I am love all the responses that I've heard. Healthcare. I am absolutely flabbergasted that in 2022, we are still limited in how to get direct services into communities where adults with a diagnosis still have to prove and have to find and go in search of clinicians and therapies and doctors. It is ridiculous. It is appalling to me that we are, when we hear the conversations and the dialogue about healthcare and living in America. You guys are in Canada, so I tend to think that you guys are living way better. I am now searching for a dentist for my son that understands that he has to be sedated. Oh, we can't do that. It's just a simple cleaning. But really and truly, the research needs to go into healthcare for people with diagnoses who require tracking. Where are they? If they get a diagnosis and you're an adult, and it is not the tracking in the negative sense, it's in the tracking in that, can we have options? If we don't have options and we don't know about the options, because our healthcare system is broken there when it comes to communication, and we don't have people like Maddie, and Jeff, said, who can advocate and speak on behalf of or be the intermediary. If it was language and I spoke another language, the hospital will bring someone to translate. We need people to be able to speak on behalf of if we're not there. That's it. That's a little bit of that's a peeve of mine. So sorry, that's it.
So I hear Jeff enthusiastically agreeing. Jeff, do you want to make a comment on that?
It's been a challenge because I don't know how to handle people with special needs. And then if you find a hospital, then they're out of network. And so you have to fight tremendously to get everything that you need. And so I agree with Jerry that you just need to be able to fight for your child. And that is one of the requirements of having an autistic child. And even also with Down syndrome as well for Jonathan. It can be done. Just don't ever give up and fight because there are laws that can help you for that. I guess I'll answer the question. I want to see more research on dual diagnosis. for itself, because I think like 25% of people with Down syndrome have autism, and a lot of times it doesn't get diagnosed. And to have more research about that and what our children are going to be like, especially, and what has to be done differently and the same for them. A second issue is what this conference is. It's just on aging, because when you come and all of a sudden you start getting older, but it's not like you're seeing other people get older, that it's going crazy for you. And just to be able to know that, this is what I can have, and this is kind of what I expect, and you can get some warning beforehand of what's coming up, and then also just what to do about it. And so, again, I respect you guys a lot for what you're doing here.
Karen, you have the last word. You take 2 minutes to talk about what your research priorities are for parents and children.
So I think that a lot of good points have already been covered, so I'm not going to repeat those. But the one thing that I don't think was mentioned, and I did hear a little bit about it in the panel discussion for people who are autistic yesterday morning, the intersectionality, because I think that all of our identities are very complex, and so when you take autism and you intersect it with being a member of the LGBTQ, well, in the US and Canada, it's a little bit different, but Q2S plus, we would say here, and in or being a member of the BIPOC community, whatever, being female versus male. Like, I think all those points of intersectionality have distinguishing features. And so I think, just like in medical research, we're starting to learn that people getting diagnosed looks different in many cases in women than it does in men. I think that needs to apply on a broader perspective. And so I think taking into account the different points of intersectionality are really important. And I really do appreciate having the opportunity to be on this panel as part of this discussion, and hearing all the different points of view, and recognizing that everyone has challenges, but also has received many blessings in raising our children who have autism. So thanks for this.
I want to thank all of you for participating in this panel. We are ending right on time, so the meeting can continue and we can all listen to some of the great commentaries. Thank you again, taking time out of your days, responding to emails and preparing for this, and sharing your unique perspectives.